Okay, it looks like we are live. I am going to have the side chat up um, on my phone. I will be checking it periodically, but I make no promises about seeing your questions in a timely fashion. So please forgive me if I miss you at any point. Okay, so I'm getting started a little bit early because, frankly, there's a lot that I've been thinking about and a lot that's going on right now in the Catholic Church. And a lot of it is really coming down to the fact that right now, the elephant in the room, about and a lot that's going the elephant in the room is the fact that the SSPX is going to go into schism. Excuse me, I need to turn that light off. The SSPX is going to go into schism. And we don't know what's going to happen after that because, as I've discussed in previous streams, you've got people like the Transalpine Redemptorists who are trying to set up some kind of a conclave to have an anti-pope. You've got people like John Henry Weston who are running around, just asking questions, saying, hey, maybe we should think about, maybe we should think about this, or maybe we should think about that. And the things that they're always thinking about are like, is the Pope really the Pope? Was that conclave that elected Leo legitimate? These two guys that I don't particularly like, they were like really happy before the conclave because they were excited. And did they know something? Well, probably what they knew was that nobody was going in there with a majority. And that maybe, just maybe, that Prevost guy had a little more juice behind them than they thought. Because one of the things that I'm going to be talking about starting May 1st is we're going to be moving from the phase where I'm talking about mainly the death of Pope Francis to the conclave that elected Pope Leo. Because that was a big change. And for some people, that was the point where they went from hating Francis to hating Leo the second he walked out on that balcony. And now there's a really good chance that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance became Catholic because Peter Thiel told him to. And Peter Thiel thinks that Pope Leo is the Antichrist. Like the literal biblical, like, will bring about the one world government and the tribulation Antichrist. That is who Peter Thiel thinks Pope Leo is. And unfortunately, there are some Catholics who are carrying water for that. And there is and I am here just doing my best to tell it like it is. And the way it is this. There is a very real possibility that if things break just the right way, that if the trad caths who are pretending to be scandalized because Pope Leo treated the Archbishop of Canterbury like the Archbishop of Canterbury, and we're freaking out because there was a woman and but see, the thing was, Leo was in his full Pope suit. She was in her full Archbishop suit. So it looked like an Archbishop standing next to the Pope. And that's what they couldn't tolerate. And they are willing to go into schism and set the Catholic Church on fire. And this is serious because Donald Trump might decide that it's in his interest to put a whole lot of money and a whole lot of power behind schismatics. And that could seriously impact the entire trajectory of religion in America. Because if we have a state-supported version of the church and an underground version of the church, well, ask Bishop Athanasius Schneider exactly how pleasant it is to be a member of the underground church, especially if you're an ethnic minority, because that was his life. And that's why I will always give Athanasius Schneider grace, because he came up in a very hard school and he became a patristic scholar. And he is a very good patristic scholar and he is a very good man. It is just that there are some things that he will never get over because of his life experience. Because he grew up in part of his childhood was spent in Soviet work camps. I came out of the 80s with religious trauma, so did Bishop Schneider. I will not compare my pain to his. Also, you know, he has a job teaching patristics. I will never have a job teaching patristics. The best I will ever do is be able to make religious studies into a successful side hustle on YouTube. So make of that what you will. So my point is that there's a lot that could be going on now that could have really serious consequences for a lot of people. And so this is kind of at the point where I'm just turning to the camera and I am going to be talking a lot of very Catholic inside baseball. Just like if you have a question, pop it in the comments. Otherwise, like, just like, I'll hum the melody and you just try to follow and you just come in on the chorus and like watch me for the key changes. Just, I'm saying just roll with it because I'm going to be talking fast and I'm going to be talking technical because there's a lot going on here. And ultimately, this occasion, like I try to present things in as ecumenical a way as I can, but at the end of the day, this is a Catholic channel, and there are some issues where, as they said in The Godfather, excuse me for a minute, I got to speak Catholic. So this is me speaking Catholic. If you want me to do a video that involves me translating Catholic into like normal human, let's go with that. And then we will, just go from there. I will make explanatory videos as whenever that's needed. And without further ado, it is now 3:26. I normally go live at 3:30, which means that the people who normally tune in, yes, both of you, sometimes there's been like 5 people on a stream. It's awesome. So anyway, I am going to go live. Now, I want to emphasize that today I am in super Catholic mode. So if you don't want me in super Catholic mode, just whenever you see the mantilla come out, just go away. Okay. I want to emphasize to any possible haters out here, this is my church purse. Yes, I am that kind of Catholic lady. I have a church purse. You will note the little saint medal on here. Yeah, Carlo Acutis. This one is not a relic because I don't want to lose it. And in my purse, well, I've got a lot of stuff. I've got the lecture schedule. I've got my rosary. I've got my other rosary. I've got my seasonal rosary. And also I have my special well, okay, it has Krampus on it. My mom brought it back for me. It had some kind of gingerbread in it. And I use it to hold my chapel veils. I have a black one and a white one, so I'm always prepared. Yes, I am being performatively pious, and Jesus said not to do that. However, I am doing this performatively to like establish my street cred. So sorry. Okay, so this is my mentilla. This is my favorite mentilla. I have a favorite mentilla. Okay. So, oh, and for anybody who's watching, yeah, this is like what I wear when I go into church to do Catholic stuff. So, but like with a dress because I'm not a scrub. So I'm just going to tie it back. I'm just going to put it over my shoulders because otherwise it's going to be super obnoxious to me. Okay, so now, in nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedicta ventris fructus Jesus Christus. Amen. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Okay, I just prayed, I just crossed myself twice in Latin, prayed the Hail Mary in Latin from memory, except I only prayed the first half because I know that the OG version doesn't include pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And like there's all kinds of weird mystical speculation that has come out of that we don't have time to talk about today because today we can't have nice things. And why can't we have nice things? Because of the SSPX. Because the SSPX is going to go into schism because they have apparently decided that it is better to, reign in DC than to serve in Rome. And let's see where we are. Okay. So I'm going to start here because basically everything that I'm going to talk about, this is what is going on in the background. I'm not going to respond to this entire video. I'm just kind of hitting the top points. This guy calls himself you get the idea that this is kind of the classic, like slightly performative Zoomer Catholic.
Guys, I think
yeah, he calls himself the traditionalist Thomist. The traditional Thomist, which means that he likes to pretend to read the Summa Theologica in English translation and really, really enjoys incense and the Latin Mass. I don't know anything else about him. So other than what I can surmise from his username, he's got a pretty good sized YouTube channel. So I'm definitely punching up at this point. And yeah, so this is what he has to say.
SSPX is probably going to be excommunicated. And this is just not my opinion. This is also the opinion of, it looks like, Bernard Fillet, a bishop of the SSPX. We're in really interesting times in the Catholic Church at the moment. We're seeing, on the one hand, a really heavy hand by the Vatican toward traditionalist communities. This is not something that's per se new, but because of the age of the internet, it's becoming more and more noticed. And at the same time, a much softer.
Okay, so let's be very clear what he's talking about here. Okay. He is talking about the fact that since 2012, since the election of Pope Francis, the Catholic Church has been making a clear and concerted effort to get the traditional conservative, the traditional and the conservative and the right wing sides of the Catholic Church under control. And part of that has to do with the fact that because the because the because people who wanted the traditional Latin Mass, many of them became either sedevacantists or became affiliated with groups like the SSPX that are basically in and out and in and out of schism. You created a situation where there were a lot of people on the right who were getting dangerously radicalized. So now those people are getting pushed back into line. Now, what these people like to forget is that the same thing happened in the 1980s under John Paul II, because in Latin America, John Paul II is the man who shut down liberation theology. And if there hadn't, and John Paul II was the person who was fighting against communism so hard that it made it difficult for that ultimately, like, Catholic Action, which is the basically like center right in Europe. Catholic Action becomes like basically all of the center right Catholic affiliated parties, right? Where it's basically like we want like social welfare because we want to make sure that like kids can grow up and be educated, but we're not going to compromise on like Catholic social teaching as relates to like things like particularly like abortion, say. So it's like basically in Europe, that's a center right position. It's a very Catholic position. Catholic Action ultimately doesn't survive because of McCarthyism. And part of that has to do with Catholic anti-communism as exemplified by John Paul II. So and then also you had the future Pope Benedict XVI was the head of the DDF for most of that period. And he was probably the most brilliant and also the most conservative cardinal and theologian that Germany produced in the like in sort of the like post-war generation, right? Or rather, the people who came of age, who were children during World War II, right? And honestly, probably the only reason why Benedict became Pope, if we're keeping it 100, is because he was just young enough that he was able to say that he hadn't actually fought on either. He hadn't actually fought, and he actually was like a 14-year-old kid, and he deserted and ran back to the seminary. And that was, basically why he became Pope. It was like he had done the minimum that could be expected, right? And they were shooting deserters, right? So the point is that the Catholic Church has always insisted on a high degree of willingness to back the hierarchy because the hierarchy deserves to be trusted. And that's always been the contract. So when your side of the argument starts getting pushed back on, you can either decide to go along with it, or you can decide to die mad, or you can decide to leave the church. Those are the options. And in the 80s and in the 90s, a lot of people left the church. And then a lot of people, when Francis said todos, 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 and Francis said, who am I to judge? Gave us just that little sliver of hope. And that was all we needed to come flooding back into the church, was just that little sliver. Because guess what? Gay couples have been sneaking around trying to get their kids baptized for as soon as you could get it done. I mean, like, I don't like it. The efforts that people have gone to cling to some kind of Catholic identity, and how quickly they're coming back under Leo, that's how many people who otherwise would have become Catholic and would have continued to be good Catholics, whether we're talking about converts or cradle Catholics, that was how much they wanted it. And that was how hard it was under Benedict, and that was how hard it was under John Paul. So, you know what? I feel for you guys, because it sucks to know that you're not on the side of the Pope. But ultimately, my brothers in Christ, you've got three options: submit to Rome, go into schism, or die mad. And those are your choices. And so let us continue.
Hand toward individuals and or groups that traditionally have been outside of the pale of the Catholic Church. Now, what we're going to do.
He's talking about gay people and women who think that using some forms of contraception may be acceptable as long as it involves a married couple who are otherwise open to raising any child that the baby distribution system might decide to drop on them. That's what he's talking about. And guess what? A lot of those people got pushed out in the 80s and the 90s and kept getting pushed out. But then Francis happened. And then we got hope back. And the thing is that he's either, and this is what traditional Catholic YouTube keeps getting wrong, because they were all either too young or they were either too young, hadn't converted to Catholicism, or were in some like deep, dark cesspool of traditional Catholicism that had gone super toxic in the way that only the Catholic Church can go toxic. And so that was all they saw, were people who were okay with all the bigotry. And they thought that was what the Catholic Church was. And so they don't understand that while they were sitting there fat and happy in a pew, everybody else was getting pushed out. So because they didn't see that, they just thought, oh yeah, the church is getting better. The church is getting more like us. Well, now that the church is saying, you know what, guys, you're getting a little bit weird. You're like picking up like some scary ideas from Protestants. Like I'm hearing some like prosperity gospel stuff sneaking in. Like you've got a lot of people that are like willing to talk to sedevacantists. That's not cool. Like the SSPX has been given more than one opportunity to get what they say they want, and they won't take it. So finally, Leo is just saying, dudes, put up or shut up. And they're saying, well, and they are literally saying that an excommunication that comes from Pope Leo is not a valid excommunication, and they are still part of the Catholic Church. I'm sorry. That doesn't cut it.
In this video is in particular look at Bishop Bernard Fillet's statements, because it appears that from his own communications with the Vatican, also kind of lack thereof on the part of the entire of the society, that this time around the excommunications, unlike in 1988, where the excommunications just applied to the bishops who were consecrated by Archbishop Lefebvre, and also the consecrators, Lefebvre and Gastromeyer, it appears this time that all of the priests of the SSPX will be excommunicated, and yet not just them, all of the faithful as well. It looks like all of the SSPX will be out of the church. This is something that's quite interesting because, again, when we look around today, you know, the SSPX has their problems. Rome has their issues with them. But in my opinion, especially with Pope Leo striving for unity, nothing that the SSPX believes, honestly, is a major hindrance toward unity, at least in my mind. Whereas, by contrast, of course, when we see.
Okay, let's be very clear. The SSPX has decided that because they think that there is a crisis in the church, they have the right to consecrate bishops without the permission of the Pope. If it is possible to consecrate bishops without the permission of the Pope, then that means that the Chinese government, with absolutely no oversight from the Pope at all whatsoever, will be able to appoint their own bishops and say, our bishops are just as legitimate as the SSPX bishops. Donald Trump can start appointing bishops in his country and say, our bishops are just as legitimate as the Pope's bishops. He can blow up the ability of the Catholic Church to make sure that the Pope gets to pick who the bishops are and not the president and not the king. Because remember, that was one of the main attractions for Henry VIII. Yeah, he wanted that divorce, but he also wanted to get the right to choose who the bishops were. Because if you choose the bishop, you choose the cardinal. And if you choose the cardinal, you choose the Pope. And he really wanted his boy to get to be Pope. That was how he got Wolsey to go along with it. If Wolsey had been able to deliver Henry a divorce, Wolsey could have been Pope. That's how high the stakes are right now, children. We are not playing. And like I say, I am being super Catholic right now. Because this is like, this is getting real. Okay, I'm going to play a little bit more, and then I'm gonna play a little bit more, and I'm gonna check my chat.
The entire bishops' conferences that teach things against God's holy law, in particular things like homosexuality or.
Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry. I have promised myself I am not going to talk about what I think about the Catholic Church, and I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second. Okay, I have decided that I am just not going to talk about my opinion of the Catholic Church and the current policy regarding homosexuality. And keep in mind, when we're talking about homosexuality in the Catholic Church, we are literally talking about under what circumstances is it okay for one human to touch another human's genitals? That is, or indeed their own genitals. That is the question. It has nothing to do with like who's allowed to fall in love with each other, who's allowed to live together, who's allowed to care about each other, who's allowed to raise kids together. It's literally regulating sex. And we're going to talk about that a lot. But I'm saving that for June because June is Pride Month. And in Pride Month, we are going to talk about Pride because Pride Month is also the month of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Because Um, okay, so somebody was saying, yes, this is straight up Holy Roman Empire shenanigans. And yes, it is. Like we could literally be talking like geopolitics getting rewritten by the Catholic Church, and I am here for this. Okay, so somebody just said, wait, what is? I don't know quite what you mean. If you can explain, I will try to explain. Otherwise, I'm going to get into screen sharing and I'm going to show you another thing that is kind of awesome. Um, so let's go.
It seems the goalposts have shifted a little bit with those prelates that are seeking female ordination.
Okay. I would like the record to show that we are 4 seconds into the video and he has made his first serious error. That is to say that the goalposts have shifted. As we will see in just a moment, the goalposts have not shifted regarding women's ordination. What instead is going on is that um, Catholic prelates, and we're talking about bishops and cardinals, right? Like, again, these are guys who have like at least a bachelor's degree and the equivalent of a master's degree or higher in theology. Plus, they have to be really good at administration. Um, to like that's like the minimum standard, right? Plus, they also have to be okay with being celibate. And these are generally like guys who could have had a perfectly good career doing something else. Um, like there are priests who like write novels, who are successful novelists or are successful poets or something like that, basically as a side hustle or a hobby, right? So the point is that these are very smart guys and they understand how politics work and they understand how people work and they understand the art of the possible. So when they see, okay, we're not going to be able to just straight up get female deacons, but we can do another thing, right? There's more than one way to skin the cat. And especially since the guys who are willing to talk women's ordination are willing to talk to women like me and say, okay, what do you really want? So let's go.
Take Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollarec, for instance. When asked in 2024 if the teaching that priestly ordination.
Oh, just to put Hollerich into okay, let the record show that I had to pause 5 seconds later. Okay, so Hollerich is an interesting figure. Hollerich is a French cardinal, and in the conclave that elected Leo, and I'll be like actually doing an episode where I just crunch the numbers on the votes. That will be coming like on the actual anniversary of Leo's election. But and this is how we can tell that a mentia is not a hijab or a tickle, because I would not have been that careless if I was covering my hair for anything other than purely performative reasons. Anyway, what I was saying is that Hollerich was a French cardinal who was considered papabile, which is the Italian way of saying popeable. Like literally, this is a guy who could be pope. And he was actually doing really well on some of the ballots until it basically became a choice between Leo and the other guy. And then all the steam was behind Leo. So Hollerich could have been Pope. And probably the reason why Hollerich is not Pope is because Hollerich was too liberal on women's ordination and too liberal on same-sex couples. And it's interesting to see that Leo really was the compromise candidate from the right and the left. Both sides says we could do business with him. And that's interesting. But I digress. The point is that Hollerich is basically as liberal as you can be on women's ordination and still be considered papabile. This is important because this means that if what Hollerich is saying is that what is coming out of Hollerich's mouth is a proposal that at least a plurality of the cardinals are willing to, like some not insignificant number of cardinals are willing to consider as an acceptable argument, and some of them might be willing to consider as an acceptable compromise. So that's why I'm listening to this guy who I usually don't like to platform, because in this case, his news, he has a good nose for news. And in this case, his news aggregation is on point. So let's continue.
Nation is reserved for men was infallible, he suggested it needed more time and better arguments, rather than considering the door closed. He ramped things up even further when he later said, I cannot imagine in the long run how the church can survive if half of the people of God suffer because they have no access to ordained ministry. But now it seems like the cardinal.
Okay. I'm going to speak very frankly and very personally. The diocese that my family lived in when I was very small and attended my one and only year of Catholic school, first grade, was one where they had a school mass and we had a cool kind of hippie priest who would like let the kids like carry in the cross and the candles, even though we weren't actually like allowed to do anything, you know, that actually like involved being anywhere near the altar because we were in first grade and he wasn't out of his mind. But like so anyway, one time I got to carry the candle for like the school mass. And that was like the proudest moment of my life. And I couldn't wait until I was 7 and I could get my first communion. And then I was going to be able to, like, because once you had your first communion, then you would be allowed to carry the like actual cross, like in the procession, right? And like, oh my God, that like somebody did that. Somebody carried Jesus's cross like in the Bible. That was like the ultimate thing of like so like if my family had stayed in Indiana, which was not possible for a whole lot of reasons, like when I was like 5 years old, I would have, or 5 and 6 years old, my like literal life's ambition would have been like focused on like getting to like do anything I could to serve mass in literally any way I could, right? And that might have changed the entire trajectory of my life because the like because my Catholic school was actually still run by nuns at that time. And like some of the nuns had kind of started to take a shine to me. Because I was the kind of kid who would assemble a small collection of um aesthetically pleasing religious pottery that I picked up at yard sales with my parents. Yeah, so, but that didn't happen because we moved to Arizona and it was a while before we found a parish and there was family drama and this, that, and the other, blah, 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 whatever. But my point is that as soon as we were established in our parish, I was like, oh, so when can I like, learn how to help out and serve at mass? And I was told, oh, well, girls can't do that in this diocese. And I was like, well, why? And he was like, well, the bishop said so. It's just how it is. Suck it up, buttercup. You don't need, yeah. So, and the thing is that, this was the mid 80s. My mom had a job. I understood a little bit about how discrimination worked. And the whole idea of like, and there was no argument like that was like, um well, there was no argument that didn't basically come down to, well, we think that you're going to get girl cooties on the altar, or we think that you're going to do a bad job, or we think that if you do the job that boys won't want to do the job, and it's more important for boys to do the job because we're really only letting kids do it at all because we want people to be priests. And we don't want you to think that maybe you might be a priest because that would mean that you were thinking maybe you could be important. And girls can't be important. Girls can like go and like, have kids. And that's important. It's really important to have kids. Oh, you want to be a nun? Why would you want to be a nun? Like, you want to teach school? Well, you can teach school and still get married. That was being a Catholic girl who wanted to be an altar server in a parish that didn't allow it. The first thing you heard was you can't get girl cooties on the altar. Your little brother can be an altar server. Your little brother can be a priest. You want to know why people didn't become nuns? Because they weren't given a chance. Because you put a white robe on a little girl, and then you tell her, hey, you know what? You're about to make your first communion. You can have the rest of the outfit. And you can dress up like a bride of Christ 24/7. The lack of female altar servers cost them a generation of nuns, because the ones that stayed are either some of the ones that stayed are really hardcore, and they're actually changing things from the inside, and they're why we're going to get female cardinals. And I salute those women because they had more courage than I did. And some of them went into Episcopal seminaries. You want to know where the nuns are? They're Episcopal priests. I don't know how we can work out a trade to get them back, but maybe we can do business. I don't know. That's not my job. But the point is, and then some of them ended up like me, where it's like we're doing religious studies, or we're doing church history, or we're doing something from the outside because we couldn't stay in until now. That is what not letting have women serve at the altar has done. And he doesn't care, because ultimately these guys have bought into the Protestant formulation that the purpose of women is to make men. And that is Protestant heresy. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going for a second.
Has read the room and lowered his expectations. In an interview last week, he suggested he could imagine a subdiaconate for women. While this would not involve ordination, it would still represent participation in the liturgy and assist with the church's diaconal ministry. So I find this fascinating. The subdiaconate was abolished by Pope Paul VI in 1972. The functions of a subdeacon were entrusted to the acolyte and the lector instead. So Cardinal Haller...
Okay, so basically what this guy is saying is that back in the day, we used to have this job that was called being a subdeacon. A subdeacon was not ordained. A subdeacon did the job of an acolyte. An acolyte is someone who basically assists the priest at the mass with like tasks that are like, it's like, basically it's like, for example, like there are things where, like, if say there's a tray that has the host that's going to be prepared for consecration, just having someone who can, like, who has the proper training in the ways to handle it, to like carry the tray over, and make sure that like all of the like basically the acolyte, it's kind of like the like prop manager, if you're thinking about it that way. That they're providing assistance, but not with any of the ritual stuff, not any of the prayer stuff. They're just sort of making sure that the priest has the correct vessels where, when and where he needs them. That's the acolyte. The lector is the person who reads aloud from the text. Now, this is where there's actually room to allow women a little bit more status, because because now when there's a deacon present, right, and a deacon can either be someone who is in training to be a priest and who has basically taken an initial set of vows. Or it can be someone who has taken a set of vows, which includes a promise to, if you are unmarried when you become a deacon, you're not allowed to marry. If you are married when you become a deacon and your wife passes away, you are not allowed to remarry. So there's a vow of chastity involved, possibly celibacy. So essentially, and the only way to get out of that is to not be a deacon anymore. So basically, the subdiaconate is preparing you for that step. The reason I'm explaining all this is because when a deacon is present, right, someone who is ordained as a deacon, when it comes to the gospel reading, you have lectors will read the first reading, lectors will read the psalm, lectors will read the second reading. The final reading is read by the deacon. If a deacon is not present, then the priest reads the gospel, because the gospel is the important part, right? Because the gospel is where you're talking directly about things that Jesus said or that Jesus did. So in that case, you're basically looking at a situation where if you say that a subdeacon, who would be a woman who is not ordained, but she's consecrated, right? She's had extra training. It could even be a 2 or 3 or 4 year program where you're trained how to read the gospel properly. You're trained to really understand it. Maybe only subdeacons are allowed to pass out the Eucharist, and only women can be subdeacons, because that would be important too, right? Or if you're a man and you're a subdeacon, then you are in training to be a deacon. So it's basically creating a job that is going to be the highest level for women will be the entry point for men. So it's you can go from if you're a girl, your step would be altar server, subdeacon, and then you either stay a subdeacon or you become a nun, which is fine, because nuns can have influence and power and do all the good things that they do. A nun could maybe even be a cardinal one day. We don't know. If you're a boy, then it's the same path. You start out as an altar server, you become and then you make a choice. You can become a subdeacon. If you want to become a subdeacon, you're going to have to again decide, do you want to be a deacon? And then you can level up. And you can either become a permanent deacon, or you can become a priest, or you can become a religious and go into consecrated life. But it would set up this once you put the subdiaconate back in, you create this very nice parallel track that in a lot of ways truly is separate but equal. Because ultimately, being a Catholic priest is a really hard job. Being a Catholic nun is a really hard job. The difference is that for a Catholic woman, in most times and most places in human history, being a nun is not the best job is not necessarily the best job in the world, but it's probably the only job that will protect a woman from sexual exploitation. Or if somebody attempts to exploit her sexually, people will care. Because, I mean, there are some things that it's not okay to do to a nun. And that's why there's porn about it, because people are weird and gross. But the point is that for a woman, there's always going to be a cost benefit analysis in which becoming a nun might not be that bad of a career choice. But for men, there's always going to be, as long as the Catholic priesthood is celibate, there is always going to be a cost benefit career choice where for a man, he's going to have to go, okay, I'm okay with other guys laughing, because there is no culture in which he ain't getting any is not a very rude thing to say about a guy. And Catholic priests just have to accept that and roll with it. And that's their life and that's their existence. And they also have to deal with priest chasers because those people exist. It's weird. It's creepy. We don't like it. We don't like to talk about it. But the point is that if you're saying, okay, only a man can be Pope because only a man has made that level of sacrifice, and plus, yeah, there's some biblical stuff, whatever, that's an acceptable argument. But you have to give women an equal path that leads to equal respect. And these guys will not understand that. And it drives me insane.
Seems to have lowered his ambitions a little bit. But for what purpose? To please the small group of women who would want to be deacons? A lot of people in the Catholic Church want a lot of things.
Okay. I am going to stop now because the rest of this is well, I'm not going to get my perfect tradcath utopia dream. So therefore, I'm going to just, well, apparently this guy's picking you know how I mentioned that there was a die mad option? Well, this guy has very, very, very much chosen the die mad option. Let's see, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second just because I'm have a little bit of a playlist because I've got a little bit of time. Oh, stop share. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So, no questions that I actually needed to answer. Cool. Okay. So, I feel like I'm cooking. I don't think I'm quite cooked yet. I'm trying to avoid getting cooked by not focusing entirely on the bad things. Because the fact that they're saying, okay, we'll make a path where women can become subdeacons, and being a subdeacon, it requires training. Again, if you had told if you had told 12-year-old me in Arizona in the 90s that, well, yeah, you want to read at mass? Sure. You can be, you can be a subdeacon when you're old enough, here's the path, here's the plans. I get to like nerd out on my gospel, and I'm, thriving, like what I'm saying is that there is a world out there, and there's probably a version of me somewhere in Arizona right now, um, who, if I was told, oh yeah, you can be a subdeacon. Yeah. And in fact, like, honestly, most subdeacons are women. Like, really, the only guys that become subdeacons are like dudes who want to be priests. So, like, unless you want to be a priest, why would you want to be a subdeacon? But hey, you do you, my brother. But the point is that if you're like a girl and you're like, oh, you could be a subdeacon, you could have like the special subdeacon robes and the special subdeacon hat. Like we could have like like mantillas and like liturgical colors. It would be so lit. But I mean, like, you can hear the excitement in my voice, right? Like, even now, I'm like, I could be a subdeacon. Like, like that would be so awesome, right? I would be consecrated. I would, whatever hoops I had to jump through, I would jump through the hoops. Um, so that's the point, is that these guys are like so traditional that they don't want to restore something that Paul VI took away in 1972 because, oh my God, it might get girl cooties on it. I'm sorry, that is some petty, whiny stuff. And it really kind of bothers and disturbs me that they are going to literally follow the SSPX into schism, that they might be willing to actually like sell us out to Donald Trump, and not because they're actually trying to restrict the Latin Mass, right? Not because they are trying to in any way actually make anything better or anything different. Instead, they're just instead they're just trying to say, well, it's not like my weird fantasy of what the Council of Trent should have been like. So therefore, I'm going to, just spend a lot of time freaking out about something that will objectively fix a lot of problems. Because honestly, a lot of women, it's like, we don't want a revolution. We just want to be told that we're not going to get girl cooties on the altar. Because you know what? Like, that kind of just like, well, you can't do that because you're a girl. Especially when, like, oh, okay, like, honestly, the main reason why I even thought that it would be really cool to serve at the altar, okay, I was a Tea Party girl, right? And by that I mean that, like, I had my little like play dishes, and I would make like little sandwiches and like snacks and things for myself, but I could only have very small portions, right? So like whatever I could fit on a plate like this big. So I would have, like a carrot stick and like a little piece of ham, but very small. If you want to know where the charcuterie craze came from, that's one of the places this came from. So the point is that, like, I knew how to fuss over dishes. And when I saw the priest, like, carefully, lovingly making sure that every single crumb of the body and blood of Christ was carefully cleansed and consumed and dealt with properly. Like, I looked at that man and game recognized game because I was impressed by the dedication with which he took care of his special dishes. Because little 3-year-old me knew that the most important thing was taking care of your special dishes. And we connected on that level. And then I was being told that no, I would get girl cooties on the special dishes. And no, yes, does that sound whiny and small and illogical? Yes, it absolutely does. But that's my point. I'm talking about my experiences as a child. Because children are the ones who have these experiences. And then children grow into adults. And then women like me, who are pretty traditional liturgically, honestly, like we get told, well, no, you can't have the pretty stuff. You can't have the mantilla. You can't have the this and the that and the other unless you do it so ironically that you are not even really Catholic. Because the second that you're actually because the second that you're theologic, because you can be as liturgically conservative as you want. But the second that you become theologically conservative, you become a trad. And the second you become a trad, nobody trusts you. Because the trads don't trust me because I'm not socially conservative. And the progressives don't trust me because I'm too theologically conservative. But you know what? I can thrive because that's just how it is. As in the immortal words of James Dean, when he was asked, "What are you rebelling against?" and he said, "What you got?" So, and there is just something deeply, deeply satisfying about putting on a mantilla and knowing that by putting on a mantilla, you are like rebelling against your parents. I love that about me. Okay, so enough random rambling. I've been trying to distract myself because I'm going to play you some Father Murr. And Father Murr is like one of the people who's like, oh, I'm not in schism. You're in schism. Have you considered the power of nuh-uh? But again, I am doing this in part because I just do not want to have to try to verbally steel man the trad argument. So I'm just going to show you the trad argument. So let's go.
We saw her go into the Clementine Chapel, which is the basement chapel in the Vatican, right next to the bones of St.
Okay, again, this is Sarah Mullally. She is the Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay, now notice she does not have her head covered. She is wearing a distinctive garment that is not identical to a Catholic cassock. However, she is wearing a belt. Her belt and her vestments are both sort of a pinkish purple color. That is the appropriate color for a bishop. She is the head of the Anglican Communion. She is the head of an independent. She is, and she has better drip than that. She could have rocked in like, yo, look at me, I am equal to the Pope, and she didn't do that. She came in dressed as an archbishop because back in the old days, Canterbury was the preeminent diocese in, like, Canterbury was the preeminent diocese in England. in much the same way that, like, the Archbishop of, like, Santa Fe, well, the Bishop of Phoenix is under him, right? So in that same way, the Archbishop of Canterbury was basically in charge of the southern half of England in terms of ecclesial matters. So she is showing full respect for the Pope by rocking up there dressed as an archbishop. She is claiming to be who and what she is. She is not claiming 1 inch above that. And Leo is returning that respect, and they can't handle it. And they are willing to go into schism rather than see Leo show that level of respect for her.
St. Peter. It's one of the most sacred spaces in the whole of the St. Peter's Basilica. It's restricted. Most people can't get in there. And there is this female so-called archbishop, who, by the way,
okay, this is John Henry Weston. John Henry Weston is my least favorite Canadian. I would like to so we have Wes Huff and Wes Ten. Is there like some kind of like weird Canadian thing that happens where like people who have Wes in their name like become weirdo apologists? I don't get this. Because it is just, yeah. Anyway, John Henry Weston founded LifeSite News. John Henry Weston was one of the people who was very much like what was very much I'm just asking questions, but maybe we should have a new conclave. We just got a new pope. We haven't even had a new pope for a whole year. And it's like my brother in Christ, no. So he's been trying to get things, basically, as my grandmother would have said, he's stirring the stick. And the stick that he is stirring is, let's have a schism. So let's just keep going for a little while.
According to Catholic teaching, remember, Anglican orders are null and void, but beyond that even, and I say,
okay, Anglican orders are null and void. That is that is language that happened in a document that was issued by Leo the 13th. Leo the 13th quit being Pope over 100 years ago. The statement that he was I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. I need to let my brain cool down. Okay, I'm just going to hit play for a second. Forgive me.
See, beyond that on purpose, you can never have a woman who's ordained because Christ didn't allow for that.
Okay, the women's ordination issue with Leo the 13th. That was entirely okay. When Leo the 13th issued that statement, that was not women's ordination was not on the table for the Anglicans either. That was not a question. It was a question about apostolic succession and how you maintained apostolic succession. Because at that time, the question was, okay, every single Anglican bishop and archbishop could trace their lineage of consecration back to a licitly and validly ordained Catholic bishop. So the question then became, on what grounds were they not a legitimate branch of the Catholic Church? Leo XIII's answer was to say that's because Anglican holy orders had become null and void because they went into schism. However, that was a document at pretty much the lowest level of magisterium at which the Pope can speak. It's basically, it came from the Pope, but it's a level of magisterium that Leo XIV is perfectly free to say, having consulted with my sister archbishop, I have decided that Anglican holy orders are valid and that we can have limited intercommunion with the Anglican Church. For example, you could say that a Catholic who goes to an Anglican church has fulfilled their Sunday obligation. And literally by doing that, you have, and to say it's, there are many ways to skin the cat. It's way above my pay grade, and I don't want to speculate wildly. But the point is, it would actually be very easy to bring the Anglican Church into some degree of communion. And there's lots of ways to do it. It will be very interesting to see what happens, particularly since part of the issue is, again, in the background of all of this, the SSPX is going into schism July 1st. That is a fact. It could change. It might change. If you pray, I suggest you pray it does change, because I think that I have made a decent argument that it could have some very severe consequences for a lot of people. But the thing is that if Leo says, for example, the SSPX holy orders are null and void, but the Anglican holy orders are just fine, that changes things a lot, because all of a sudden the Anglican schism is basically healed in some way. What will that look like? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. There's way too much that could happen. But if it does, it would be big. It would be really big. And what I can tell you is that if it does happen, that Wes Huff and John Henry Weston are both going to be really unhappy with the Catholic Church.
So this is a regular old woman leading a false sect, pretending to be a priest and bishop, and the Vatican is going along with the charade, allowing her to...
Okay, again, I would like to apologize to my Anglican friends for the words that are coming out of that man's mouth. I would also like to point out that he is a layman with a podcast in Canada. I am a laywoman with a podcast in Arizona. The difference between him and me is the number of subs on his channel. According to the rules of the Catholic Church, if I get a angry response video from Tuco, yes, friend of the channel, Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, otherwise known as Tuco, and in my heart, the Grand Inquisitor. If he sends me a text message and says, delete your channel, or you are excommunicated, I will have to make a choice. And I hope that Amanda and Aldo won't be too mad at me when I delete the channel. John Henry Weston is in exactly the same position, except that he has more of a financial incentive than I do to keep his channel on if he gets told to sit down and shut up. I'm just saying. So the point is also keep in mind, he is literally criticizing what the Pope and some very senior bishops and some very senior cardinals were doing at the Vatican. Again, like it's like they've got the power, and not only do they have the institutional power, but they've got the people power, and he's got a YouTube channel. And you know what? I've got a YouTube channel too, and I've proven that like somebody with absolutely no qualifications or media training can build a there are 77 people subscribed to this channel. I could actually like fill a restaurant with just my channel subscribers. And you know, so that is, in terms of like a human society, that's not inconsequential, right? And it's because y'all are incredibly kind and tolerant and like to listen to me talk about weird stuff. And that's great. That's beautiful. But that's the point. Humans are social creatures. We like being social together. This guy has figured out a way to exploit the human desire to be social, and you will have to excuse me. I am going to move the channel. I realize this is going to create some shaky cam. I apologize, and I will now be at a really horrible angle, but my back hurts and my computer chair is kind of bad, so I will just try to not lean back entirely so I at least look fairly normal at the screen. I don't have a microphone. This is what I do for fun on weekends. Anyway, oh yes, before I get started with John Henry Weston, I did want to point out that the See of Canterbury was indeed founded by Augustine of Canterbury, not to be confused with Augustine of Hippo. This is a different Augustine, who became the first Archbishop of Canterbury in the year 597. Not 1597, 597. We're in like this diocese was around like in the single digits. Think about everything you know about church history and then realize that like 1500 years of it had not happened yet. And that's how old Canterbury is. So yeah, like she is the bishop of an extremely venerable see, right? And she deserves respect. So let's continue, my children.
To do this and to be sitting in choir, if you will, in the Clementine Chapel and giving a blessing. And the Archbishop who leads the Vatican department, if you will, for Christian unity, signs himself as if he's receiving a real blessing from this woman. It's complete insanity for sure. But it's interesting to me, these are the remarks from two of the most well-noted Vatican journalists, and I say mild-mannered, charitable, very Catholics who try and really just do objective reporting. They had it. Here is the words of Ed Penton. I think we'll go to Ed first. This was Ed Penton on the question: by publicly treating Sarah Mullally as a valid archbishop, allowing her to lead prayers with the Pope, bless a real archbishop in the Clementine Chapel and officiate Anglican vespers in a historic Roman church, the Vatican is serving to affirm her, now get this, the pontificate of and she doesn't.
Okay, I am.
Pope Francis, many.
Okay, I let myself get too wrapped up in the ceremonially of it all. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to answer a few questions from the chat. Yeah, somebody brought up there's the five solas and whatnot. Yeah, I mean there's and Pope Leo talked about this, right? When he made his remarks after he met with Archbishop Malele, that there's definitely issues that would have to be cleared up. And one of those issues is women's ordination. On the other hand, like, there's ways around that too. Like all of these are solvable problems for people that are willing to work to solve them. So, that's one of those things where it's like, I'm willing to say, you know what, this one is beyond my pay grade. I'm just going to sit here and watch what happens. And like, basically, like, look at me as like, I'm the like person who's providing color commentary, right? I'm watching the best people in the world play the game in the best way they can. And we are coming up on the SSPX going into schism, which is effectively going to be the Catholic version of the World Cup. And I'm just here to tell you about it. And today, this is the time where I'm just letting loose on some of the people that are going to be playing against the team that's coached by Pope Leo. Look at it this way. So yeah, so basically, yeah, there's issues. Actually, no, the Anglicans believe in the real, and this is something that Catholics don't always get. Anglicans believe in the real presence. Anglicans do not believe in transubstantiation. What that basically means is that transubstantiation is a model for how it is that a wafer becomes the body and blood of Christ, right? How we believe that a miracle occurs. How does that miracle occur? Transubstantiation is basically the Catholic attempt to explain what has happened. We have adopted it as our best model of how things occur. However, it is also entirely possible to say that as long as a denomination believes in the real presence, it doesn't necessarily matter how they think the real presence gets there. In the same way that the Armenian Catholic Church is Miaphysite. Now, they're not monophysite, but they're Miaphysite, which at one point was a Christological model that was considered a formal Miaphysitism, which I will do a video on separately. Again, if you need footnotes, I will provide footnotes later. It was at one point also a formal heresy. Now, if you're a Miaphysite, you're allowed. Monophysite, not so much. So there would be potential to say that as long as, because the Orthodox also don't believe in transubstantiation, but they very much believe in the real presence. So the point is that there would be wiggle room to say, okay, you guys are like, you could even say like women who have, you could even say that Anglican ordination of women is valid but not licit, and only people who have licit ordinations can serve in Roman Catholic churches, right? So there's all kinds of special pleading that could go on, some of which actually would benefit the SSPX and some of which would not. Because at the end of the day, it would all depend on, are you willing to accept the authority of the Pope? And if the Anglicans are willing to accept the authority of the Pope, as long as they don't have to give up women's ordination, they might go for that deal. Especially if they don't have to believe in transubstantiation, as long as they have to believe in the real presence, which they do. By the way, that's also the Lutheran situation. Again, my theory of Leo, Leo Leo at the end of the day is a guy from Chicago. He's a guy who wanted to be the third Blues Brother. He is a man who knows the difference between a trilby and a fedora and picked the fedora. That's Leo. Leo's trying to put the band back together. And there was this great video that I'm going to show a clip of at some point where somebody asked Leo, it's like, do you think it's safe to go to Lebanon? And he was like, well, we're going. So yeah, yeah, like I said, this is the stream where I'm like super duper Catholic, and you'll just have to apologize. Oh yeah, and then the final question was, wait, Arizona isn't its own ecclesiastical province? Nope, we are not. And actually, I'm probably like I'm at some point probably going to have to do a separate stream about this issue. But essentially, if you want to get a really good idea of like how certain immigrant groups spread in America and when people were settling when and where and how, a really good way to do that is to look at the geography of Catholic dioceses because they tell you a really interesting story. Because at one point, we were actually part of the Diocese of Mexico City. And then things happened, and Arizona and New Mexico were the same territory of the United States of America. And that meant that we became part of the same diocese, the Diocese of Santa Fe. That continued. And remember, if you have been watching your Mesa Mondays with proper dedication and have also checked out the Tempe Tuesdays, you will see a photograph and some footage that I took at the oldest Catholic church in the Phoenix metro area. It was built in 1903. Arizona didn't have that many Catholics, and the Catholics that we did have were poor. And we didn't start getting Catholics who were making money until like really the until like the 1920s and 1930s. And that was largely because Arizona was on the route if you were driving across to California. So a lot of people actually got stuck in Arizona, sometimes for even a year or two, if they were trying to drive across. And there were also a lot of, small towns, and then we got an Air Force base and this and that and the other. But the Catholics really started getting money when it was people that were moving in for the university. And then we had the Bashes and the Coreys. And the Bash and the and they were both and the Bashes and the Coreys were both the sons of Lebanese Maronite Catholics who had moved to Arizona, became prosperous, and married Mexican women. And yeah, so that makes Arizona deeply, deeply weird. And one of the things that makes this weird is the fact that, like, Mesa, okay, was not founded until like 1885. And then the Phoenix metro area did not start to expand um, after until after World War II. So we are a very new city, and we did not, and once we, and originally the Diocese of Phoenix was under Tucson. So it was like you had Phoenix and Tucson that were both under Santa Fe. And for a while, Phoenix was actually administered out of Tucson. So then they split Phoenix and Tucson to be two separate dioceses of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And basically, they haven't wanted to upset the apple cart enough to have um, Phoenix be to have Phoenix become its own archdiocese, especially since now part of the part of the issue is that a lot of the money that is helping out the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and is therefore helping out New Mexico is actually coming out of Phoenix and Tucson. And so there's a lot of church politics involved because Santa Fe does not necessarily want to separate from Phoenix, and Phoenix does not necessarily want the headache of having to be archbishop when there's somebody in Santa Fe who's perfectly willing to be archbishop, and everybody in Santa Fe is really proud and happy about the fact that they have the archdiocese. And not having a archbishop just means that we just have a bishop and auxiliary bishops. And having auxiliary bishops means that that's how you build your bench, right? Because if you've got a archbishop, if you have a bishop who has a bunch of auxiliary bishops, well, you can see, it gives you a chance to really see, like, can somebody do the bishop job? So, I mean, there's arguments pro and con. I don't think anybody really cares. I think that people just want to see the work getting done, and I'm speculating wildly based on just observation and not a lot of data. But that's just kind of what I've seen by the way things look on a map, is that in a lot of ways, like the map of Catholic diocese is kind of the map of how America looked to Catholic prelates the last time the map got redrawn, which is usually about 50 years ago. That's all I have to say about that one. Okay, let's see. We don't have anything else in the chat. Okay, cool. It's almost 5 o'clock. I had wanted to go and check out Kip Davis's stream, but I think I may like I'm gonna give myself another half hour because he usually likes to kibitz around. Okay, I'm just gonna set a timer for 30 minutes. I'm gonna give you a little bit of myrrh and then we'll just keep going.
Many people have found that a very good word. As I
got it from somebody else too, I'm sure, but it seems to sum it all up. Disastrous. It was a disastrous pontificate. I believe there's a book out right now. Right. I just saw Father Jerry Murray from New York, good friend, promoting that book.
Okay, just random. We don't like Francis.
I think if there was any doubt in anyone's mind, any reasonable Catholic, there is no doubt. There can't be any doubt. Things are disastrous to the second power, to the third power. It's just, it's going on, it's going on, it's going on. And he is leading exactly.
Okay, more Leo bad, Leo bad. I was hoping for actual SSPX content.
Celebrated by the Vatican and even the Pope.
It happened, and the modernists are in charge. This is exactly what's going on. That you can have a layperson dressed up, a lay woman dressed.
Okay, yeah, this is just more Mullally bad. We are not going to respect the papacy because they are insufficiently bigoted against women. You know, never mind that, you know, all you really have to do is just like basically, it's like just give women a little bit of respect and the opportunity to help and know that their help will be valued and respected. And, you know, like maybe give them like a fancy hat and a pat on the head and tell them good job and like, you know, oh yeah, and like, you know, make sure that we have, you know, like healthcare and education and like, you know, don't get sexually harassed. That's all women. What do women want? Women want to be treated like human beings and not have to deal with creeps. That's what women want. Shh. And someone is at the door. Please excuse me. I'm Michael, go ask, go tell Ellie that Mosiah wants to hang out. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I have what one of my jobs is being my daughter's social secretary, and yeah, and so you get to hear the barking dog chorus. You know, just imagine that they're doing for me what I tried to do for Pope Leo and just, you know, bark at annoying people. Anyway, so we shall continue the barking. It looks like, wow, some people are actually sticking around. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to hear about what did Vigano have to say. And if you don't know who Vigano is, I will just point you to my video on the topic. I'm going to mute the thunder and the lightning, and it's very, very frightening.
Well, the news doesn't really stop. We had Vigano issue yesterday or the day before a written response to.
If you don't remember who Vigano is, I did a video on him recently. He's one of the people who probably wants to be the SSPX anti-pope. To distinguish him from Carlo Acutis or Acutis, I'm not quite sure how you say his last name. I've only seen it written and I've heard it pronounced a lot of different ways, and none of them were by his parents. Yeah, so I call Vigano is Evil Carl, is Evil Carlo, to distinguish him from Saint Carlo. So we have Saint Carlo and Evil Carlo, or just Vigano. But Vigano is an interesting character who has apparently decided that I'm rubber, you're glue. What you say bounces off me and sticks to you, is an effective strategy for dealing with the Pope. So, yeah, say of that what you will. Anthony Stein is a fan of his. I will be very interested to see if Anthony Stein is actually a Roman Catholic as of July 4th.
He issued a letter responding to the whole Trump v. Leo thing, and we'll go over that in a moment. But a news story did break yesterday that has gotten a lot of people a little riled up, and it's this. We'll go over this in brief before we get to our Vigano letter, since that is our main story. The Vatican has ended the cause for canonization for Jesuit Father Walter Chiswick. Hey, you might think.
Okay, I'm gonna fast forward through the whole Chiswick thing. It's basically canonization causes can get scuppered for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which are good and some of which are bad. And it's always very difficult to say what's going on. There's a lot of politics involved. And, frankly, there's a lot of the process where you don't want to get too involved in it, because ultimately you're doing character assassination of a person who is, undoubtedly a really good person who did a lot of good stuff, and maybe they did a lot of bad stuff, but they have a lot of really dedicated fans. And it's always very complicated and very sensitive. And it's not something that I personally feel comfortable turning into a political football. Because, also anymore, you're getting into like really contemporary saints where sometimes they have living relatives. Like Carlo Acutis, he was born in 1991. He has siblings that are in high school. Like, he's going to have blood relatives who know that they have a relative who is a saint, like, for generations after this, right? Your uncle pray. Yeah, you need somebody to do you a solid. Yeah, pray to your uncle the saint. Right? So when you're talking about somebody where it's like that's their family, it's really like uncomfortable to like start doing character assassination. I don't like to try to do it. Okay, so here we get our Vigano content.
The Vatican published 2 days ago on the 17th of April, 2026, published to his exsurgedomine.it website. It's not on the front page if you go look for it, but it's over in his English language archives. It's where he publishes new things. Here's the text. It's not super long. It is understandable that many Catholics feel offended and scandalized by the statements made by the President of the United States regarding Leo, even if one certainly cannot claim that Jorge Bergoglio refrained during his reign from launching attacks and provocations against Donald Trump.
Okay, again, people like Anthony Stein will be like, oh, it's a European thing to refer to the Pope by his family name. No, it is not. The reason why you do that is because you want to call attention to who the man was before and who his family was, and to imply that what he did as a human being was more important than what he did in his role as the Pope. It is an insult. It's not quite as deadly an insult as dead naming, but it's right up there. It's like the Catholic equivalent of dead naming. So that's why, like, even Benedict, who I kind of have beef with Benedict a little tiny bit, I still call him Benedict or the future Pope Benedict. I don't call him Ratzinger. Because he's owed the basic respect of being called by his chosen name. And I did not know him well enough that I would have been able to call him by whatever his like brother called him. And his brother may have very well called him Pope Benedict. I don't know. But the point is that this is an insult. He knows it's an insult. He is insulting the Pope. He is making a choice. He says that he's Catholic. Again, we are both Catholic lay people who live near a major metropolitan area in the Southwest. The difference between him and me is that he has more education, fewer kids, and has a more successful YouTube channel. He's been doing it longer. He's better at what he does because he's a really good news aggregator. But again, he has as much formal power in the Catholic Church as I do. And arguably, he has a little bit less because I'm actually trusted to get up at my church and read from the gospel and not screw it up. Or at least I have like failed to screw it up to the point that like I have continued to be asked to come back as a lector after I have read in front of every single priest that we have. And they have a zero tolerance policy for bad liturgy. And if a lector messes up, it better not be the lector's fault. And so, yeah, I am actually probably held to a higher standard. Yeah, and I've actually been somebody's catechism sponsor. So arguably, I am in better grace.
Moreover, the latter, meaning Francis,
intervention and I'm not saying this to say that I am a better person, that I'm a better Catholic. What I'm saying is that I can point to things in my life that lead me to understand that the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, as represented by the guy who is in a direct chain of command, he might be low level, but he's in the chain of command, right? Is like a loyal member of Pope Leo's chain of command, has looked at me, has looked at my life and said, you are fulfilling like the minimum amount of good Catholic enough that we will let you fully participate in the sacraments. We will even let you kind of help out at Mass at like an extremely low level, but we'll let you help out, right? I don't think Anthony Stein can claim that because he drives to Mass, he eats his Jesus, and then he drives home. And that's all he can do. And he gets to sit and, try to teach his kids Latin, and that's awesome. But I don't know how involved he is in his parish. Like, I'm genuinely worried that this is a very smart man who's getting himself isolated on the internet. And I'm not concerned trolling. I am concerned. Especially since he's listening to Vigano.
contextualized, or rather Trump, contextualized by the statements orchestrated against him this week on CBS. Their propaganda program, 60 Minutes, by three utterly corrupt cardinals, Supich, McElroy, and Tobin, three prelates who are notoriously ultra-Bergolian and ultra-progressive, part of the network of the repeated doer of grave evil deeds, Ted McCarrick, inextricably.
Okay, on another stream, I talked about Ted McCarrick. Again, Ted McCarrick his behavior was facilitated by a network of secrecy, and it was facilitated by the fact that he had a series of long-term consensual relationships with fellow seminarians when he was himself in seminary. They were breaking their vows. Their behavior was not appropriate. It was not abuse. It took a very long time for people to discover that he was predating men, and then that he was preying upon boys, and by boys I mean physically adult males under the age of 18. Not that that makes a difference, but it explains what happened, right? It was not immediately clear that he was predating among people who could not meaningfully offer consent because of the difference in their status, rather than either getting his act together as he got older, or that he wasn't like just quietly involved with another priest, which, again, breaking his vows, yes. Acceptable? No. However, would it have involved abuse? No, it would not have. That's what the culture of secrecy does. Because there is one thing that I can tell you about James Martin, and that is that James Martin is keeping his vows, because the second James Martin puts a toe out of line, the second that James Martin even answers the question publicly, are you yourself gay? He has lost credibility. His behavior has to be above reproach. And that is appropriate, and that is good. However, that can only happen if you are willing to accept out gay priests, because otherwise you're going to end up with a culture of secrecy, and a culture of secrecy is how you end up with McCarrick. Because Thomas Jefferson wrote some of the most beautiful things about freedom that any human being has ever written. Thomas Jefferson also did horrible things to the enslaved half-sister of his wife. Both of those things are true. The same is true of Ted McCarrick. And neither one of those things would have been possible in a culture that allowed men to do things in secret. Because if Sally Hemings had been the full sister of Thomas Jefferson's wife, she would have been able to demand marriage. It would have been creepy. It would have been scandalous. But she would have moved into the White House, and everyone would have had to shake her hand and say, Mrs. Jefferson, thank you for, you have set a beautiful table. That abuse comes from secrecy and from having people be able to get what they want without having to give anything up. That is the world that Anthony Stein is okay with. That is the world that Pope Leo does not want to exist. He's okay with hatred. He's okay with secrecy. He just wants it to look pretty from the outside, and he wants his chanting and his Latin. And the tragedy is that he doesn't think that's what he wants. He thinks he just wants order and tradition and to know right from wrong. And he doesn't understand that the Catholic Church has to thread the needle between tradition and progressivism. That the extreme left is never going to get everything that they want, and that the extreme right is never going to get everything that they want, but that we can meet in the middle and we can be okay together and we can be Catholic together, and they will not accept that. And so let's go.
Linked to the radical woke left, and key electors and closest collaborators of Robert Prevost. When asked by journalists about Trump's post, Leo replied, "I am not afraid of the Trump administration, nor of boldly proclaiming the message of the gospel, which is what I believe I am called to do and what the church is called to do." These words.
Okay, I just wanted to pause a second. That actually is an accurate representation of what Pope Leo said. He said, "I'm not going to back down. I have no fear of civil power." He is determined. He is going to do what is right. And again, part of this is the fact that the Catholic Church learned their lesson from looking at what happened with Mussolini, where Mussolini's rise was facilitated by the Catholic Church because of the way that was facilitated by the Catholic Church, because Mussolini was willing to stop the anti-clericalism. Trump is offering them the same poison pill, and Leo isn't biting, because Leo knows Latin America. And in Latin America, they saw what happened when you make nice with dictators. And what happens when you make nice with dictators is people die. And they learned that with Mussolini, and they got that reinforced in Latin America. And Leo knows that, and he is not, because, fool me once, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. He's not going to bring shame on his name a third time. Right? Or, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, three times is enemy action. Leo knows enemy action. Remember, bro's got a math degree from Villanova. He knows how to do algebra.
It's apparently indisputable coming from Prevost, can however shift sharply in meaning depending on how they are interpreted. They may simply mean I have no fear of civil power, thereby asserting the superiority of the Catholic Church's spiritual authority over any earthly authority. Or in a diametrically opposite sense, they may mean I have no fear of this administration, implying that in other instances, he deems it legitimate to feel fear and to refrain from boldly proclaiming the message of the gospel. And immediately one is reminded of how often we have seen the Vatican fear other administrations, both in Washington, especially when the interference of Hillary Clinton and John Podesta went so far as to block the Vatican's banking transaction.
Okay. You notice the rhetorical sleight of hand, right? It's like, okay, so the Pope is being asked to not comment on, basic political stuff like, oh, maybe we should not have a war, which is something that literally every pope has said. Like every pope, like John Paul II criticized the first Gulf War. It's something that popes do. Popes do not like American adventurism. And basically he's saying that because Leo is following a very clear track that has been followed by literally every pope, in most people's lifetime. In one case, and then is willing to do business, is willing to not keep churches open during COVID when churches are causing super spreader events. And all of a sudden, they're going to throw temper tantrums about that and use that to delegitimize the priests. And again, this is coming from Vigano, who has gotten excommunicated for schism. Like, according to the rules, and let me be very clear about this. Anthony Stein is willing to quote Vigano because he thinks that Vigano is not legitimately excommunicated. Because if Anthony Stein believed that Vigano was legitimately excommunicated, then according to Vigano's understanding, and according to Anthony Stein's understanding, Vigano is going to hell. I hope that they are wrong. According to Pope Francis, I am allowed to dare to pray that they are wrong. And that when Vigano passes away of natural causes at a great old age, that he will not go to hell. That is not what Anthony Stein would believe. In order to say, and he is willing to throw himself into schism rather than believe that Vigano is going into hell. And that is an act of great love and great charity. And in a way, I even kind of respect that. But also, look at what you're doing and look at who they're doing it for.
Encyclical Laudato Si, or the blessing that Prevost imparted to a block of ice specifically shipped from Antarctica during a truly cringeworthy ceremony at Castel Gandolfo. Despite his insistence that he's not a politician.
Okay, yeah, this is just more kind of randomness. So, and again, criticizing a Catholic priest for blessing something is kind of ridiculous. So I've got like about 4 minutes left. I'm going to close out on a happy note. So I'm going to I was being a little bit rough on Dan McClellan the other day and kind of tone policing him. And I want to say that he does do a lot of a good job shutting down bad Catholic apologetics. And by bad Catholic apologetics, I'm talking about Catholics who assume that just because the current reading, okay, it is indeed the case that very often the Catholic Church has preserved a reading of the text, or maybe even one or two readings of the text. That date back to the earliest days of the church, right? Sometimes we preserve extremely old readings. Sometimes we preserve extremely old understandings of things, right? However, the version that was preserved by the Catholic Church is generally not the only version that existed, and frequently it was not the dominant version at the time. And we have to understand that. Because if we don't understand that, we don't understand anything. And if we don't accept that church history is intellectual history, and if we don't understand the fact that if what am I trying to say? If we don't understand the fact that, in the same way that Isaac Newton did not invent the laws of motion, he just figured out the math to understand them, that saying, well, John Duns Scotus made up the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. It's like, yeah, he made up the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, just like Newton made up the laws of motion, right? Now, can you have non-Newtonian physics? Yes, you can. But are we really there yet? And does Newtonian and if the Catholic Church has Newtonian physics right now, I mean, maybe that's okay. I don't know. But hey, we've at least got Newtonian physics. And that's my argument, basically, is that the Catholic Church treats theology as the queen of the sciences. And that actually and for Catholics, that actually means something. And one of the things that it means is that we are allowed to improve and evolve and do all of these things to make our tradition bigger and better and bolder. Because we're allowed to grow as long as we're growing in the proper direction and as long as we don't get too trad or too progressive. Because if you get too far in either direction, things start getting weird. And all my timers are going off. So I'm just going to give myself about 2 minutes of Dan McClellan just really helping out the Catholic Church by shutting down bad apologetics.
It's just funny at this point. The Lord's Prayer, too. The Lord's Prayer, too. The Lord's Prayer meant something different than I thought it meant.
All right, let's see it.
Give us this day our daily bread. Turns out that doesn't mean what it looks like.
You sure about that?
You know what daily bread translates back to in Greek?
The Greek word is epiousios, which is kind of a hapax legomenon, and that phrase is a fancy way of saying it only occurs once in a given corpus. But it actually occurs twice in the New Testament, but we have no occurrence of this word in any of the Greek literature that predates the New Testament. So we have it here in Matthew 6:11, and also in the parallel passage in Luke 11:3. And here is the entry for epiousios in BDAG, which is what we call a Greek English lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature. This is kind of the standard lexicon for New Testament Greek. And there are 4 different senses that are provided for epiousios. The first says it derives from epi and ousia, which would be for, to be, or on existence, or something like that. And the bold gives us necessary for existence, which is in agreement with Origen and Chrysostom and Jerome. Sense number 2 calls it a substantivizing of epitene ouson, and then you have an abbreviation SC, which is Latin for scilicet or silicet, which means kind of like and provide, or you can think of, and then himeron. In other words, it means for the current, for the being, the current one, what's the current day. And day is just assumed because this is kind of idiomatic. Kind of like if I say, have a good one, I might mean bowel movement, but probably I mean have a good day.
Okay, I'm going to just pause here because Dan is giving very good examples, but they involve poop. And that's fine. but and people can watch his content elsewhere, and they should. But the point is that yeah, he laid out the Greek beautifully. So let's go more.
Where it's derived from epiene, becoming. So for the coming time, the bread of the future. The idea would be kind of a daily ration. Let's get it today for the future. So this is widely understood by scholars to refer either to the bread that is necessary for existence, or the bread for today, or the bread for tomorrow.
Super mysterious word, epiosia, spelled Epioosios. You know what that breaks down to? Two words. Epi means super, osios means substantial.
So we've got a few problems here, beginning with the fact that the Greek word epiousios doesn't break down into the English words super and substantial.
Yeah, and again, Dan McClellan is showing why text critical scholarship and source critical scholarship and just critical scholarship in general is very, very important, because you need people who know the original languages, who can flay the meaning down to the bone and say, no, in this time and in this place, this is what that word meant. And if you have an interpretation that says that like if your entire theology hinges on that word having meant something that it did not mean and could not have meant in that time and in that place, you are wrong. We need those people. And if you have somebody with a beard who's just kind of playing around with the Greek, they need to make it very clear that they are just kind of playing around with the Greek and that they don't really know what they're talking about. Because ultimately, any authority that they can claim has to be coming from someone who knows the Greek inside and out, to the point that they just pick up the Bible and read it in Greek, because why wouldn't you? So yeah, respect. And again, is that guy giving what is a legitimate Catholic reading? Yeah, kinda. He is. Not going to argue with him on his theology. Is he giving a good historical reading? No. And that means it's bad apologetics. And the last thing we need is bad apologetics. Because if there's one thing that a Protestant needs to know how to spot if they're going to get out, it's bad apologetics. If there's something that an LDS person is going to need to spot before they can get out, it's bad apologetics. And if they see bad apologetics coming from Catholics, they are not going to get out. So bad apologetics do no one any favors, because bad apologetics also make Catholics vulnerable to the arguments of atheists who are trying to break people out of thinking stupidly. Because nobody wants to be required to be dumb. So you can't have bad apologetics. I'm sorry, my brothers, you can't. That's why at the end of the day, I'm subscribed to Dan McClellan's channel, and probably not not any Catholic apologetics channels, because Dan actually knows where his towel is.
What this content creator is doing is breaking down Jerome's idiosyncratic Latin translation of this word in Matthew 6:11, supersubstantialum, into the English equivalents, super and substantial. But that's misunderstanding what's going on in the Latin, and the Latin is not necessarily accurately reflecting what's going on in the Greek. Because where Jerome rendered supersubstantialum for Matthew 6:11, most scholars think that initially the idea was necessary for existence, subsistence. Because Jerome in Luke 11:3 renders the same thing that all previous Latin renderings had done for both Matthew and Luke. He renders quotidianum, which means daily. So we've got a unique rendering in Matthew 6:11 that doesn't mean super plus substantial, but it also isn't what the Greek breaks down into. And to say super substantial is to understand it according to the English sense of super, as in like extra or something like that. But really it means over, upon, or for.
I just wanted to highlight this because this brought up a very important point, is that in Latin, that there are certain Latin words that have been adopted into English, like super and like substantial, that have slightly different meanings in Latin than they do in English, which creates problems for Catholic theology, which creates problems when Catholics are talking about Catholic theology, is because we have words like mystery that have very, very specific, highly technical meanings in Catholic theology that are not the same as the common English meaning, to the point that like genuine confusion occurs even among Catholic apologists. So it's not good, it's, and so it's very important to understand that the common English meaning is not the Latin meaning, and that if the Latin meaning and the English meaning have diverged enough that it's causing genuine confusion, that maybe we need to come up with a different theological term in English. And I bring this up in part because that's also what's going on with the whole co-redemptrix issue. Because in English, co means someone who is equal to, someone who is perfectly capable of stepping in and doing the job if the main person is unavailable. And that's why co-redemptrix is not allowed. And we'll be talking about that in May, but I just wanted to let Dan cook for a little bit longer.
And so trying to understand what the Greek means through the English equivalence of the Latin is not a very good way to understand what's going on here. But let's take a look at the other way to break it down. Epi and ousios. They don't mean super and substantial. When we look at epi and BDAG, there are several pages to this entry. You can see it starts toward the top of the left column. And fundamentally, the idea is upon, but that can have all kinds of extensions and figurative senses. So sense number one, marker of location or surface, answering the question where, on, upon, near. We can go down to sense number two, the middle of the right column, marker of presence or occurrence near an object or area, at or near. Toward the bottom, marker of involvement in an official proceeding, before. Sense number four.
Okay, I'm not up for more of Dan reading the dictionary. Sorry.
Pointed out that Cyprian comes well before Jerome and Jerome's idiosyncratic rendering supersubstantialum. And again, Christians did not need that idiosyncratic reading to understand, give us this day our daily bread, to be referring to the Eucharist or to be interpreted as a reference to the Eucharist. In fact, let's go take a look.
Okay, so that was kind of the end of what I had for videos. So I'm going to just kind of wind it up right here with a final closing thought. And that is this. The thing that Dan did not include in his critique, partly because, again, this is extremely Catholic inside baseball, of which he is not aware, is that the whole emphasis, the reason why that guy was dragging up Jerome's somewhat idiosyncratic reading of "Give us this day our daily bread" as referring to, and only referring to, the Eucharist, was because that reading was seized upon in the 19th century, and even more so in the early 20th century during the papacy of Pope Pius X, at which time, because there was a whole bunch of basically debates between Catholics and Protestants about the status of the Eucharist. So there was a big influence, so there was a big push to encourage frequent, ideally daily, reception of the Eucharist by Catholics. But it's a 19th and early 20th century development. Again, the Eucharist, not a new practice. Encouraging people to receive daily, relatively new practice. And in order to find a way to encourage people to do it, they went all the way back to Jerome and were like, okay, yeah, technically you only have to receive once a year. And generally people, that's part of the reason why going to Mass at Christmas and Easter is a thing, right? Because then because then you know that you're good, right? You've received in December, and you've received sometime in the spring. So no matter how you're counting it as a calendar year, you are good for the next 12-month period, plus a little bit for slop, right? But if the emphasis is, okay, well, it means in the Lord's Prayer, it means our daily bread. We have to be receiving daily. That's a level of commitment, and that makes being not allowed to receive the Eucharist that much more emotionally difficult. Like Dan said, frequent reception of the Eucharist is costly signaling, but it's costly signaling in a way that is basically just requiring the individual to put a little bit of extra effort into things. So there's not community pressure because the person is already going kind of above and beyond, right? So this bad apologetic, so the beauty part is that this bad apologetic rendering of this particular argument, which he is presenting as, I am a super pious Catholic who is like representing the wisdom of the ages, is actually preserving a relatively modern innovation that really didn't become a super big deal until the beginning of the 20th century. And that the actual early Catholic practice was to have extremely restricted reception of the Eucharist. So, in other words, it's not just biblically illiterate, it's theologically illiterate and historically illiterate. So, I hope this was an interesting stream. I am going to stop because people are home now and I have to live